Good morning, everybody. Thank you so much for coming to the Twin Cities Shared Mobility Collaborative quarterly convening. It is super great to see you all here this morning. I'm Mary Morris-Marty. I'm Executive Director of Move Minneapolis, and with Meredith Klikatka, I am co-chair of the collaborative. I think it's fair to say that everybody in the field of shared mobility is reeling right now, from users to planners to operators. We seem like we were all heading in the same direction and going pretty fast, and all of a sudden we have a public health crisis, and equally sudden we've recognized a centuries-old racial inequities crisis, and between those two things everything has changed. I'd say there's not a lot of solid information about safety on transit or other shared mobility. We have a lot of hearsay, but there is a large amount of fear and misinformation. By contrast, there's plenty of information on how we in transportation have served and often failed communities of color. I've been in this space, shared mobility, for 18 years. If there's one thing I think we've learned, it's that we're super nimble. We can take what we know and we can build systems that work. So with the right heart and the right data and the right modes and the right partnerships, and as you all know, we have to have the right funding. Shared mobility can be a huge part of this solution, and we really have to be. Every single person here and all of your colleagues are going to have a part in building a fast, convenient, nimble, accessible, affordable, equitable, and safe transportation system that in the end is going to do a lot, not just to solve inequities, but to solve climate change and our emissions and air quality problems. I am so looking forward to learning from all of the speakers today, and I can't wait to work with all of you more in the future. There's going to be a lot we have to do, so let's work even harder together. And thanks again for coming. I want to turn it over to my co-chair, Meredith.
Thanks, Mary. Very well said. Good morning, everyone. Meredith Klikatka, the Shared Mobility Program Manager with Metro Transit. I'll keep my comments brief. I just wanted to kick us off kind of acknowledging that it's been a difficult few weeks in the Twin Cities and across the country between our collective grief over George Floyd's murder and continuing efforts to really face and dismantle some structural racism. As many of us know, especially in the transportation sector, the transportation has been a huge player in creating and kind of reinforcing those systems. But I want to echo Mary's comments that I really believe shared mobility investments are an opportunity to correct some of those wrongs if we spend the time with our communities to listen and really apply it to the problems we're facing. So I just hope the concepts and projects presented today will spark some ideas that we carry over into this rebuilding process. And I'm really excited to hear from our speakers. So with that, I think I am turning it over to Gina.
That's right. Thank you very much, Meredith and Mary, for those great words to get us kicked off today as we move into the program for the convening. My name is Gina Boss. I'm the Associate Director for Engagement and Education at the Center for Transportation Studies. And our center provides administrative and engagement support to the collaborative. And some of you may recall, and some of you may not, that we were all set to hold this program in person back in March. And obviously things kind of blew up with the pandemic, and we just were not, we weren't prepared to offer it, but our wonderful panelists, our group of panelists, were very gracious and willing to come back and offer their presentations to us today. And I think it's a really, as Mary and Meredith were saying, it's a good starting point. It's a good time to kind of set where we're at, but really also start looking to the future and to start to understand and have those conversations around how can shared mobility inform and improve our direction as we move forward. So just some housekeeping items. All attendees are on mute. And so if you would like to ask a question, please use the Q&A box, and at the bottom of your screen there's an icon for Q&A. So type your question into the Q&A box and then indicate which speaker or speakers you would like to address your question to, and we'll move through those at the end of the presentations. If you have any technical issues, and hopefully we're all getting comfortable with Zoom and all of these different video conferencing systems, but if you do have any technical issues, please use the chat box and Chelsea will address those for you. So with that, let's start the program. So I'm going to introduce our first presenter, Michael Mechtenberg from Metro Transit, and he's going to be talking about bus-only lanes. Michael has been with the planning department at Metro Transit since 2006. During this time, he was project manager of the Midtown Corridor Alternative Analysis, reviewing rail and bus alternatives in the Midtown Greenway, and the service planning lead of several Metro BRT projects. Michael is now the program manager of speed and reliability projects with the goal of identifying opportunities and managing improvements to our local bus network. So take it away, Michael.
All right, thank you, Gina. I'm gonna go ahead and share my screen, and hopefully we'll be able to, excuse me one second here, we'll be able to get this presentation going. I've got, pull it up right here. Okay, so today I'm going to talk about bus lanes. I'm going to spend a few minutes talking about a bus lane project that we implemented in the Twin Cities on Hennepin Avenue. But then the majority of the presentation will be about more of the conceptual ideas behind bus lanes and bus lane planning. So just a quick background, Hennepin Avenue was sort of our first bus lane here in the region. There was a bus lane pilot in Everett, Massachusetts. You see sort of a video that was passed around there back in 2017. And it was really from this that we got the inspiration of doing our own pilot. I think planners were really sort of amazed at how simple this pilot was. All they did was put out traffic cones, and I think it was very satisfying to watch the buses breeze by traffic as it was stopped. So this really piqued our interest here at Metro Transit, and we initiated some discussions with the city of Minneapolis in 2017 about where we could try a pilot like this in Minneapolis. And Hennepin Avenue was quickly identified as the preferred project location. So for those not familiar with the Twin Cities, this is the area that we were looking at. So here's an image of Minneapolis sort of viewed from uptown. And the red line there is the section of Hennepin Avenue that we focused on. It's about a mile long. The southern end of it is, Lake Street or the Uptown Transit Station. The northern boundary was Franklin Avenue. And then I-94 is just to the north of that. So there are entrance ramps just beyond Franklin Avenue. And that really plays a key role in some of the delays, particularly in the morning, as we see backups on 94 trickling back to Hennepin Avenue. And then there in sort of the top of the image is of course, downtown Minneapolis. So the conversation initiated in 2017, but really got started in earnest in 2018. I became involved at that time, and we worked with the city on first developing a pilot, so to sort of test out what this bus lane might look like. Here's a map of the bus lane as piloted back in May of 2018. We were pretty specific about the location and times that we would be deploying the bus lane. So the blue line indicates the northbound bus lane, and it was between 26th Street and Franklin Avenue just during the morning peak. The southbound bus lane is shown in red between 26th and Uptown Transit Station, and this was only deployed during the PM peak. So fairly limited, but also very targeted to where and when we were seeing the delays. So it was a 3-day pilot, so a fairly limited amount of time to do actual data collection. our main goal was just to get public feedback. We really wanted to hear from riders and the public what they thought of this, and then to observe the operations. Were there any tweaks that we would need to be making before we implemented it permanently? I would say the pilot was very successful in those regards, and the bus lanes were ultimately implemented in September of 2019. We did make some minor changes, so even as short as that pilot was, I think it was helpful in helping us refine our design. I do want to say that the partnership with city staff was really key to both the pilot and this permanent implementation. They really helped us throughout this. And in fact, you see city staff there were the ones that actually did the paint work. So very strong partnership there. Without them, we obviously couldn't have done this. So I will say that, there was the pilot and there was this permanent bus lane, but even the permanent one has sort of an asterisk by it because Hennepin Avenue is going to be completely rebuilt in 2023, and which is fine because that's about the time this red paint's going to be wearing off. We will be working with them, and we have been working with them on the new design. And I think having the bus lane implemented now is really helpful because we can just pretty much bake that into the new design of Hennepin Avenue. It's been a success, as you'll see, and I think everybody agrees that it'll be included in the final design. I'll also add that the Metro E line, which is an arterial BRT route, will be built at the same time the city is rebuilding Hennepin Avenue. And so in 2023, the city will be building Hennepin Avenue sort of BRT ready for implementation of the E line. So for the rest of the presentation, again, I want to talk about more of the concepts behind bus lanes. And these can be applied, they were applied to Hennepin, and there certainly can be applied to other corridors as we look ahead to future projects. So ticking off the list, we're going to talk about on-time performance, passenger delay, the value of person throughput, talk about delay along a corridor and sort of where and when we see it. The fact that bus lanes have their greatest benefits on the worst traffic days. And then finally, that bus lanes are really just one strategy in our goal of improving service. So in terms of on-time performance, this is a very common metric for us to measure service reliability. In our region, we would consider on-time if the bus is either 1 minute early or 5 minutes late. So there's a 6-minute window there. With a goal of 85% on-time performance. This is a very simple metric, and because of that, it has several drawbacks. So on-time doesn't always mean that it's a competitive travel time. We can always add more time to a schedule, but that doesn't mean that riders are getting to where they want to go any faster. It's a measure that really focuses on the bus performance. And the passengers in the bus are not really considered. So there are newer metrics that I think do a better job of looking at it sort of holistically, both from a bus and passenger perspective. On-time performance doesn't do a great job of capturing the impact of really, really late trips. And so, with this measure, you're either on time or you're not. So if you're 6 minutes late or 20 minutes late, it's still just considered late. But obviously there's a major difference between those two in terms of the impact to riders. Finally, sort of the typical strategy for addressing on-time performance issues is really just adding time to the schedule. And that doesn't really do a good job of addressing the root cause of the problems. So it's more of a Band-Aid. So next we'll look at a measure that I think does a little bit better job of looking at this sort of from a two-dimensional approach, and that would be delay. So here we have two different types of delay. There's the vehicle delay, the travel time in excess of the fastest 2% of travel times between a stop pair. So basically what this is saying is, what's the shortest amount of time the bus can travel from stop A to stop B? And those are typically the very earliest morning or the very latest at night trips. where there's really, where there's no traffic and there's fewer delays. Anything beyond that time would be considered delay. So passenger delay then is the stop delay pair, the vehicle delay, multiplied by the load, the number of passengers on the bus for that stop segment. And so just to sort of visualize that for you, here we have a bus moving along fairly quickly between this pair of stops. Let's say this is that 5 a.m. trip. So at the crack of dawn, it can make this in 8 minutes. A little further into the morning, bus is going between those two stops, but now it's taking 11 minutes. Let's say this is at 8 a.m., right? So in the middle of the a.m. peak. So in this example, the vehicle would be experiencing 3 minutes of delay. Because it's an a.m. peak trip, it's a full bus. Let's say there are 30 passengers on the bus. In this scenario, we'd have 90 minutes of passenger delay. And so what this does, again, is able to give us a little bit more nuance to when looking at where and when we should be exploring bus lanes. Next key concept is person throughput. This is an image that I'm sure many of you have seen, comparing the sort of the footprint of 60 passengers on a bus versus 60 folks riding bikes versus 60 people in a car. I mean, really the message here is what we're trying to do is move people and not cars through a corridor. The irony is that what we often find are that the busiest parts of a route, so when the bus is fullest, is also the slowest part of the route. And so that's where you're seeing those the impacts to passenger delay. In the example of Hennepin Avenue, what we found is that during the northbound trips for the AM peak, close to 50% of the corridor users were actually on the bus. And during the PM peak going south, about 45% of corridor users were on the bus. So these are incredibly high mode splits. And again, I think the takeaway here is that of all the modes, transit is really best positioned to move a large volume of people through a corridor efficiently. Next up, talking about sort of the distribution of delay. So in this sample, the vehicle is experiencing 5 minutes of delay through a corridor. You could also say through across its trip on the entire route. And here might be one version of how that delay is distributed. So whether these hash marks are blocks or miles, it doesn't really matter. But in this scenario, it's evenly distributed. And the challenge here is that we really would struggle to narrow our focus if we're looking at making an investment in travel time. A different version of this might look like the second sample here, where let's say the beginning of the trip typically runs pretty smoothly, and it's really as you're approaching point B, let's say that's downtown, where you're starting to see more delays. And so, this can help us to a certain extent say, well, it's probably that last segment that, we should be looking at more closely. But I think what is more common is where delay is really either front-loaded or in-loaded in just a few segments. So in this third scenario, what you're seeing is that 5 minutes of delay is really concentrated on those last two segments. And again, these could be 2 miles or 2 blocks. It doesn't really matter. The point here is that we really need to know where the bus is experiencing delays and when the bus is experiencing delays. I would say the second takeaway is that there's really no minimum length needed for a bus lane. As I was talking to a policymaker ahead of the Hennepin pilot back in 2018, I think there was a lot of skepticism that bus lanes that were so short, just 3 or 4 blocks, would really make a meaningful difference. And I think what I would want to say is, if that's where all the delay is happening, that is where we should be investing. I mean, even if it's just a single block, if all 5 minutes are on a single block, that's fine. Let's do the bus lane there. There's no minimum length. You don't have to do it for a mile in order to have good bus lanes. So taking that concept and applying it to the real world, this is a heat map of bus travel speeds. This is real GPS data taken from the bus. This is before the bus lanes were implemented. And in this example, this is Route 6. These are northbound trips. So at the bottom of the screen would be the Uptown Transit Station. And then as you sort of move up on the screen, you're approaching Franklin Avenue. And then left to right on this graphic is, so the early morning, so it starts at 5 a.m. And on the far right side, those are trips ending at 6 p.m. And red here is slower, blue being faster. So what you can, I think, pretty quickly see is that there is a very clear indication of delay. And that would be between Franklin and 25th, which is where the bus lanes are today, between roughly 6:45 to around 8:45 or 9 a.m. So using this type of information, we can really target where we want to place those investments. Next concept would be sort of the bus lane performance. This graphic is sort of a lot to swallow, but I'll try to walk you through it quickly. Each dot here represents a trip over the course of a year. And the green line at the bottom represents the schedule time. So all these trips are Route 6 going northbound between Uptown and Franklin between 7:30 and 8:30 a.m. So this is sort of a narrow slice, just looking at a single route and an hour's worth of time. Again, 6 minutes is the schedule time, and that's that lower green line. The green line above it would be considered late, so that's 5 minutes beyond the scheduled time. And where we really want to be is like right in this range here. So you don't want to be too early, you don't want to be too late. I would say these are all pretty much perfect. These trips, I would say, are slightly less than perfect, but still very good. Again, if you're too early, then you're potentially holding, and riders don't like that. And we're approaching being late, but we're still not late yet. So as we go above that green, that top green line, I would say these trips are starting to get poor. So these are late, and the travel times for these are basically double what we have on the schedule. So these are anywhere from 12, 13, 14 minutes late on a segment that was really scheduled for 6 minutes. So these are poor performing trips. But it's really these that I would consider totally unacceptable. These are, of course, all late, but they're so significantly late that it's really challenging for riders to plan their day around trips that are this late. You can see here that some of these are 15, 20 minutes late. If you had an appointment or a meeting or a presentation at a certain time, and you got stuck on one of these trips, you would be in big trouble. So it's trips like these that really drive people away from transit. But it's also trips like these that we're really focused on for the bus lanes. Again, bus lane works by avoiding traffic. And so they're really most beneficial on the worst traffic days. The images you see here of I-94, and again, a lot of the delays that we experience on Hennepin are backups on 94, whether there's snow or construction or other. For those trips going northbound in the morning, the average trip saw about an 18% improvement with the bus lane, which is great. I think that alone would be a success. But what really stands out is on those worst trips, we're seeing about a 72% improvement. So we're bringing those numbers down significantly on those red trips that were just totally unacceptable. Finally, looking at some other strategies, bus lanes are really most effective when we do them with other improvements. So let's talk about just a few of those real quick. Here is this is a core local route. It's 60 minutes long, so between the start and end of the trip, it's on the road for 60 minutes. These numbers are just samples, but let's say 24 minutes of those, the bus is moving at an appropriate speed or normal speed of 5 miles an hour or above. Some of that sometime is moving slowly, so less than 5 miles an hour. And that's either you're stuck in traffic or you're pulling in and out of stops. About 9 minutes would be at a stop where you're loading or unloading passengers. And 11 minutes of the 60 would be when you're at a stop or you're waiting. So this is caused from either signal delay or you're trying to get out of the stop, but you're waiting for traffic to clear. These numbers are sort of representative. They're not, don't take them literally. So what are some of the ways that we could improve this trip? Again, bus lanes really have one purpose, which is to avoid congestion. So looking at some of these other buckets though, if you're stuck at a stop, you could look at doing queue jumps. So where you can get out ahead of traffic at a signal, or you can move the bus stop from its location near side of an intersection to far side. To reduce time at the stop, you could do something like fare prepayment or all-door boarding. As the bus is moving slowly, of course, bus lanes are a great strategy there. You could also look at transit signal priorities, so the bus gets more green time, or bus stop consolidation. Again, part of the reason the bus moves slow is as it's pulling in and out of stops. So if there are fewer stops, you're going to have less of that slow time. And even for the majority of the time here where the bus is moving sort of normally, we can still look at ways to improve that. I would say, one thing you could do is maybe look at streamlining the route to make it more direct for passengers. So just looking ahead, I think by most measures, the Hennepin bus lane was a success. And I think that we'll be looking at, we're excited about some additional improvements planned with BRT. So a lot of those other improvements on the previous slide, we're going to be implementing with BRT in 2023. We are working with the city currently on a bus lane project in 2020. Right now that's kind of on the bubble. We're trying to piece together some funding for it. But regardless of if we get that done this year or it gets delayed to next year, the city is sort of wrapping up its 10-year transportation action plan, and bus lanes are a really big component of that. So I do think the future is really bright for bus lanes going forward. And that was it.
Great. Well, thank you, Michael. Really interesting information. And, I ride the bus, so of course I fancy myself as an amateur transit planner. So this was really, this was really helpful information to really kind of better understand the mechanics and the process behind it. So thank you very much.
Yes, great.
All right, let's move to our next presentation on employer-based travel demand management, or TDM. And for that, we have Becky Alper from Move Minneapolis. Becky leads the employer outreach at Move Minneapolis, consulting with businesses on commuter benefits and transportation best practices. She provides a policy and programmatic path towards sustainability with measurable results. That's the key element there, right? Becky led behavior change programming for St. Paul Smart Trips and Move Minnesota for 5 years, focusing on both employer-based programs and neighborhood efforts. She holds master's and bachelor's degrees from Clark University. And in 2018, she won the Association for Commuter Transportation's 40 Under 40 Award. And she currently serves as that organization's Midwest chapter president. So take it away, Becky.
Great. Thank you so much for having me here today. Can you hear me okay? Hopefully everybody can. All right. So I am going to share 2 of our recent pre-COVID-19 outreach efforts, looking at 2 very different employers, both based in the North Loop of Minneapolis. So before I dig in though, I want to do a quick review of the concept of TDM, or transportation demand management, and why it matters for Minneapolis. Looking at our organization, Move Minneapolis envisions a future in which transportation choices enable easy movement, enhance economic vitality, reduce carbon emissions, reduce congestion, and contribute to a healthy and vibrant region centered on a Minneapolis downtown core where businesses and workers thrive. So when we look at downtown Minneapolis, doing something other than driving alone is important because there is simply not enough parking downtown for everyone to drive and store their cars. And that's okay, because this means that downtown is thriving. And people increasingly want walkable, social spaces. But what do we do to get there? We don't build more parking and bigger roads. We think about how to influence human behavior. And I love this new graphic that I found from Mobility Lab. There are a lot of different factors that go into the travel behavior choices that people make. And I would define TDM as the process of influencing that travel behavior. So here we see kind of the environment that people are surrounded with. And I think TDM is drawing attention to certain aspects of that. So we can also look at it a different way. The graphic on the left shows all these different options that are available kind of on the infrastructure or the services side. And TDM is the process of influencing that human behavior, kind of the flip side of infrastructure. And it's important to focus on understanding how people make their transportation decisions and then helping people use all of that infrastructure and all of those services in place for transit, rideshare, walking, biking, and telework. So what we do at Move Minneapolis is a program of encouragement and incentives to help people know and use these options. In short, it's about maximizing use of existing infrastructure and getting more efficiency out of the system. So I want to give two examples. So I'm going to start with Be the Match. Be the Match is kind of our classic type of client that we've worked a lot with in downtown Minneapolis, office building. Be the Match is operated by the National Marrow Donor Program. Just a piece about them in case you didn't know. They manage the largest and most diverse bone marrow registry in the world. They have about 1,000 employees headquartered in the North Loop neighborhood in Minneapolis, and they actually relocated there, built this building back in 2016. So we came in at a time when they had just done a parking survey. They called it a parking survey. That was in May of 2019. They were experiencing some challenges regarding commuting, some dissatisfaction, and we came in to help them do a deep dive, looking at their programs and their policies. And we love starting with the data. That's really helpful to get kind of a baseline of information. We didn't do a survey on top of that because we didn't want to over survey their employees, and we could use their data. So no surprise, the survey told us that most people drive alone to work. Those are those blue columns, and co-here is the term for telework. So it also gave us some insight into travel behaviors and desired options. I didn't put this on my presentation, but those were some things we found out too, which was very useful. As part of our work with them, we worked with facilities management, HR leaders, and kind of to refresh the organization's commuter benefits programming. It included new wording in their employee handbook, their new hire information packet. So here's a couple examples. The left is what was there before, and I gave a snippet of what we put in. So kind of going into more detail, talking about it with more positive language, leading with the various options, not leading with parking. That's key. And all of these we did with the ultimate goal of creating a sustainable employee commute culture. We were also on site we came and several times to increase awareness of new commute benefits and help plan transit and bike trips for employees. And this is me, and I swear there were more people that we talked to, but you know how it is when you're busy and you don't get pictures of those moments. And as a result, they did some notable program and policy changes. Their changes to their MetroPass subsidy, their sign-up process, you know, completely revamped their benefits. I would say not completely due to us, but partially. And as a result of these revamped benefits and the employee engagement, new hire materials, etc., Be the Match accomplished double-digit increases in transit use, growing MetroPass ridership from 19% to 35% in a matter of only 6 months. And in case you're curious where they're at today, they are 100% telework. So that is what has happened there. All right, so I'm going to go on to the next North Loop employer, very different, that we've worked with recently, share some of our recent findings, and that is Smack Shack. Smack Shack, you may know of it as the lobster restaurant. It's on Washington Avenue, again in the North Loop, and we worked intensively with them on a project to gain further insight into transportation barriers and commute habits of service sector employees. So a very different group. And our work there started with a commuter survey. We did it in English and Spanish. Purpose was to look at some of the struggles that low-wage workers face in their commutes. It was a small sample size. I want to say that right off the bat. But it's something that could be replicated in the future. And we're considering some other places, but then I think this is perhaps the story of outreach and in-person events at this time. And then COVID-19 happened. So we'll see where that goes. But I want to say that they are, and most service sector places are a low-wage employer. So I would put money on it that all non-managerial employees are eligible based on their hourly wage for the Transit Assistance Program, which is TAP, the program of Metro Transit. One of our findings was that nobody was enrolled. We did start that enrollment effort. We didn't finish it, but sorry about that. But we did some other stuff as part of it. So it was coupled with bringing additional awareness of programming, and we found more information out about their habits as well. So some of the results, I'll just skip to a couple, share two survey questions and their results. All back of house staff were Spanish speaking as their first language. So they took the survey in Spanish. That's on the right side. And then all front of house staff were English speaking as their first language and took the survey in English. So you can see big differences in terms of having a car. We purposely didn't say own or have access to. We kept it real simple between those two populations. And it goes without saying that most of the back of house took transit, but and most of the front of house did not. We also, we asked a new question. This is one we've never asked before on our surveys. Do you have a smartphone? And we felt this was important because we don't know a lot about this population, and we thought there might be a lower overall tendency to have a smartphone and thus less access to real-time transit information or rideshare apps or bike share rental, etc. And this answer surprised us in a good way. Part of our outreach there, as a result of this collaboration, we translated the Guaranteed Ride Home brochure into Spanish. That's another program that we kind of raised awareness regarding eligibility to Smack Shack employees. And I think that can serve the greater Twin Cities and other employers too. And that was a collaboration with Metro Transit. And then we also, we hope to keep this going with other employers. And one thing we found successful, the picture on the right is we did definitely incentivized taking the survey with gift cards, and we gave away $20 go-to cards, that sort of thing. And that made it feel less of us just going in and saying, hey, can you give us all your information? And it was more of there was more reciprocity there, more a kind of relationship building. So I want to talk about the takeaways from this. And I have 3. So one of which is our work with Smack Shack, and some of our work even with MetroPass over the last year has made us think that there needs to be more research into pass programs to better serve different types of employers. You know, we've found that we have yet to find a service sector, service industry employer that offers MetroPass. And, you know, TAP from this data, it shows that there's kind of a low awareness of it, only 7,000 active cards as of last November. So, you know, questions that we're asking is, why aren't more service industry employers promoting this program and enrolling employees? Or what other types of pass models could serve this sector of employee? And we're looking forward to looking into that a little bit more. So COVID-19 has radically changed the commute for many, like my example with Be the Match. So, you know, it's our work that took them in percentage points, you know, double-digit percentage points towards using more transit. Well, that, you know, the pandemic took them to being pretty much 100% sustainable overnight. So, but as we think about a return to the office, you know, COVID-19 is definitely not a reason to roll over and let single occupant vehicles rule supreme. And for the future of our planet, we need to keep working in this area. The transportation sector is the largest source of greenhouse gas emissions in the US at about 29%, and the majority of those emissions come from passenger cars and light duty trucks. So it's imperative upon us that we think about a recovery or a renaissance that remember that graphic from downtown Minneapolis, that doesn't involve people driving alone back to work, because we'll have clogged streets and there won't be enough parking for them and the planet. So last but not least, my last takeaway is that although hard work, that behavior change is possible. And we know this based on how companies like Be the Match and others around the country are reducing their driver loan rates through systematic changes in their commuter benefits programs. And we're learning more about employees in the service industry thanks to Smack Shack. So I would say it's really a process of measurement, doing interventions or outreach or engagement, but doing some actions in between, and then doing further measurement to determine the success of your programming. And with that in mind, please check out our new website at moveminneapolis.org and keep moving like a boss, whether it's by transit or telework. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Becky. And I really appreciate that you showed the difference between, or not so much difference, but that you are looking at, you know, the service industry employers as well as the corporate employers, because I think that there is maybe some untapped opportunity there. I do hope they cooked that lobster up for you, and
They did let us sample some. It was delicious.
Okay, well, good. That's an unexpected.
Thank you.
Of your work, right? All right. Well, thank you so much. So our next group of presenters are from the University of Minnesota, and they're going to be presenting on a project around shared mobility at the urban fringe. So I'm going to quickly introduce the 4 of them, and then I'm going to turn it over to Fernando Berga, who's the assistant professor at the at the Humphrey School and is with the Master of Urban and Regional Planning, or MERP program. So you're going to hear me say MERP throughout these introductions now. So Fernando, his research deals with equity in urban planning, particularly in relation to the incorporation of immigrants. He combines planning history, ethnographic fieldwork, and design techniques to evaluate how planning addresses immigrant life, but also to show how immigrants can engage planning to assert agency, build political power, and mobilize immigrant-based planning agendas. Raymond Elliott is a MERP student, and his background in cycling advocacy and active mobility nonprofits led him to pursuing this master's in planning at the Humphrey School. His studies focus on where transportation planning intersects with climate change, spatial mismatch, and equity. Chris Hong, she is also obviously a master's student with MERP, and she's focused her degree on sustainable land use planning and placemaking. So outside of school, she's a year-round bike commuter, good for you, and a fierce advocate for bike and pedestrian infrastructure. And finally, we have Matthias Huey, who is, in addition to a MERP student, is also seeking his master's in landscape architecture. And his interests lie at the intersection of policy, design, and analysis, with a specific focus at the systems level and the human experience. And he comes to the field with a background in transportation and fine art. So with that, I'm going to turn things over to Fernando, who's going to introduce the project, and then the students will take on the rest of the presentation. So Fernando, over to you, and you're on mute.
Fernando messaged me saying that you would have to step away for a second. You're on mute, Gina.
You take it away then, right?
All right. Hello,
hey,
everyone.
We're flexible.
Yeah. Hello, everyone. My name is Raymond Elliott. I'm one of the 3 master's students that has been working with Dr. Berga, along with my 2 peers for the last year. We've been collaborating with Scott County SmartLink, as well as the Center for Urban and Regional Affairs, to bring a pretty urban solution ultimately, which we think about shared mobility as being, or at least it's presented as being a much more urban solution to a problem. Like, it doesn't really, we don't think about how it might scale to a suburban area, but you know, our country is becoming rapidly more suburbanized. You know, with around what, some 50-odd%, according to a City Lab study, 50-odd% of the country is now living in the suburban space. So Fernando runs a semester-long design class every year of looking at specific sites and doing planning and kind of confronting topical and novel issues in the planning world. This last year we did shared mobility. Year before that was CAVs, or what is it? Networked autonomous vehicles, which, sorry, lost my train of thought there. I wasn't expecting to have to do this. So yeah, we started by looking at a place which is Scott County and Shakopee specifically, which is a, you know, a first-ring suburb, a little bit south of Minneapolis. Chris or Matthias, if you want to hop in at any second, and if you feel like I'm missing anything, please contribute.
Yeah, I'll jump in and take off with the intro here. So
Thank you.
The class, as Raymond mentioned, was fall semester 2019. And then the 3 of us decided to continue on with our portion of this and do an independent study this past spring, just because the scope of the project and looking at the implementation of shared mobility in a suburban setting presented such a sort of large and complex project, and it raised a lot of questions. Just as a quick summary, some of the other groups in the class were focusing on shared mobility hubs within within the city of Minneapolis itself, and so I had much smaller footprints, and we're working in an area with already built out a bike network, transit network, et cetera. And a lot of these things were already in place. So this was kind of a unique site for us because we focused on originally focused on the Marshall Road Transit Station, which is located at the intersection of Marshall Road and Highway 169. And it is about, I think, 2 miles directly south of downtown Shakopee. And this site is currently, it's a former car dealership. And the county, or MBTA, purchased the site and uses it to store their buses. The MVTA offices and SmartLink office are located here. They do all of their repair work here, so it serves as a garage as well. And it also functions as a park and ride, running buses daily to the Mall of America area and the University of Minnesota, as well as downtown Minneapolis. So the question surrounding this was, looking at this site and thinking, this was initially prompted from the project from a couple of years ago, looking at connected autonomous vehicles. They were kind of curious, how do we prepare for connected autonomous vehicles? And how does this start to look in a shared mobility economy? How can we set this location up for success into the future? And we ended up developing a set of objectives around this to investigate the potential for implementing a shared mobility hub network across Scott County, and what would that look like? And then develop some recommendations for both the site, the Marshall Road Transit Station, as well as some recommendations for implementing a shared mobility network within Shakopee and within the county. Because in order for this park and ride to really function, we thought, how do we start to get the people who aren't using it, who still need to access downtown Minneapolis, who are still trying to get to Mall of America, et cetera. Some of the opportunities posed by the site is that it's right on 169. The buses have separate access to it, so they have very potentially fast connection to the greater region. Those buses, however, are currently still getting stuck in traffic, and that's another matter to work out, outside of this. There's a lot of natural amenities in Shakopee. People want to live in Shakopee. There's a lot of entertainment options, from Valley Fair to Mystic Lake, and the Renaissance Festival, et cetera. So there's a lot of draw to get people into Shakopee. There's a historic downtown. And there's, out along the freeway, there's these large kind of areas that are, mostly parking at this point, that are available, or, potentially in the future will be available for redevelopment. So just adjacent to this Marshall Road Transit Station, for instance, is another car dealership that was actually located in the original transit station building, but then just bought the parcel next door and built a new, bigger dealership. And what's that going to look like in the future? How long is that business model going to be viable? And long term, Scott County MVTA expressed that they would be potentially interested in converting this entire area into some more productive, useful land use development. So you want to go to the next poster, Raymond? And I will say that our presentation was and is currently a poster project, and we have, I think, 14 different posters, and here we've just kind of condensed and selected out a few of our key posters. So this is our first network analysis poster. And so to begin the project, we looked at identifying potential destinations within Shakopee and Scott County, and we categorized them based on food establishments, public housing, which in this area is pretty much just public senior housing. The transit stops, which I will say we ultimately did leave out of this analysis because there's only one local route, and we thought that potentially that could be adjusted based on the findings of, what might be better stops, what might be better areas to service. So we did leave that out from our analysis. Then we also looked at, schools and hospitals, I'm sorry, I'm in trouble seeing some of these, parks, attractions like Mystic Lake, etc., and then existing park and rides. And the thought was here, we drew walk sheds of a 1/4 mile around most destinations. Some of the attractions we used a 1/2 mile, but just looking at, okay, how far would people be willing to walk to get to these locations? Then we took those walk sheds and overlapped them and did a count of the diversity of locations accessible from where those walk sheds overlapped. And so you can see in the second step 2, the dark blue is where you have the most diverse access overlapping. So that's the places where senior housing, attractions, parks, schools, food resources, et cetera, like all of those things are accessible from that point. And then you have places where you only have, one type of location, like either a school or a food resource, whatever it may be, accessible by walking within that area. And so what that did was identify geographic areas where we could start to focus our search for potential mobility hubs. Once we had that, we overlaid existing public parcels, publicly owned land on the map to identify, because one of the things with Scott County was they didn't want to have to invest a lot of money. They didn't want to have to be looking at acquisition, et cetera, of property. So we looked at where they had land and where it would be easiest to start to implement these potential hub locations. And that developed a list of, I think, something like 65 potential locations. And then from there, we started to refine that list to provide a final set of recommended locations.
I guess I can take it from here. So with our site analysis, or with our analysis of this program, we really kind of, I think, thought of it broadly in 3 distinct spheres, which is we had our community level, which was looking at Shakopee writ large in Scott County, where Matthias did his GIS network analysis. And our next level down was looking at it more of a neighborhood level, which is the area directly surrounding our shared mobility site, which you can see here in this poster, an analysis of the site. And a part of making shared mobility effective in a context such as this is really examining the built environment as it exists, which is, a pretty far-flung, low-density space, which we tried to illustrate here through these analyses, like as you can see, and then begin to reimagine them as something that would be, one, fun to use, but also make shared mobility more conducive. What the Jeff Speck thing of saying that folks will use public transit when it's safe, fun, and easy. Is that the 3 points?
No, it's useful. It is safe. It's comfortable, and it's
interesting. So, we're looking at these current suburban landforms, and they aren't really any of those things. There's just a large amount of asphalt to cross. There's very fast traffic. They are not very visually diverse. So, we have to kind of critically look at all these things and really begin to understand and ask ourselves, like, hey, what can we do to change this? Which, leads into our next thing. I'm flagging here, which leads into our next thing of we want to look at this whole space around here, and then we turned a more critical eye to the station itself as a final part of our analysis. Chris?
Okay, so we developed this proposed redesign of the Marshall Road Transit Station that would serve as like a pilot program for the greater suburban mobility network. So we started by identifying the goals for this redesign, which includes increasing bus ridership, increasing functionality and use, encouraging active transportation, condensing the space devoted to parking, and giving the station a distinct identity. Some of the components, because we can't go into the full list of redesign ideas, we're increasing the lobby space. Right now it's pretty limited and there's not very much seating, so that there can be more amenities, more comfortable seating and things like that. We proposed a parking garage to consolidate the parking space and allow more interesting landscaping ideas. There are some great parks nearby the station, so we thought a trail to connect them to the station and some great like wayfinding signage would encourage more use, because if you're just standing there, you would never know about them. And finally, we suggested a fenced-in parklet with a playground and some seating. So that is our redesign idea, and we hope that we can apply them to the station itself and some future mobility hubs.
Fernando, would you like to chime in with anything now that you're back?
Yes, hello everyone, and apologies for my slight absence. I had to go downstairs to get the delivery man. I just wanted to say that this project is the official submission for APA Minnesota Student Award for this year from my land use class. The students worked arduously and very effectively over the past semester to include and expand a lot of the corrections and feedback that they got from the final presentation for the land use class, which was unique. This was the only project that went further among many others, 12 in total, as a matter of fact, that had corrections to be carried out. So they did amazing work, and their diligence and effort is represented in a total of 14 projects, which we don't have time to show here. But I just wanted to recognize that and also applaud their efforts. The translation of shared mobility hub thinking from urban to less urban, suburban, and rural areas is a really fascinating scope, trailblazing in many ways, because that thinking still remains very core oriented and urban centric. So this was the challenge that they had in front of them. And the posters speak to the quality and the proficiency of their thinking, their design, and their implementation ideas.
Great. Well, thank you, Fernando and team. And it's, you know, it's always great to be able to showcase sort of the creativity that our students can bring to today's problems. So thank you again for that presentation. So now we're going to turn to our next two presenters, and I love the title of their presentation, and it's Liftoff, Innovations that Connect People to the Lives They Want to Lead. And our two presenters are first Sheila Holbrook-White. So with 20 years experience working to increase the quantity and quality of transportation options for individuals with disabilities, older adults, and low-income families in urban, suburban, and rural communities in the Deep South and Texas. Sheila transitioned to Minnesota in December 2018. So we know she's already a brave woman because she moved to Minnesota in December. So working to advance the priority strategies outlined in the Washington County Transit Needs Study, Sheila has actively collaborated with for-profit, nonprofit, and governmental partners, transportation providers, families, and individuals in the development of services that increase access to health and wellness, employment, community, and the region. And Sheila is joined by Winna Bernard, who is a senior lead social worker in Washington County. And with 27 years of experience working as a social worker in intellectual and developmental disabilities at Washington County, Bernard is passionate about creating person-centered services in housing, employment, and transportation. So with that, I will let you take it away.
Thank you, Gina, very much. I'm going to start our presentation. Okay, why is this not going? Hold on. Oh, I'm
So Sheila, if you want to hit share screen and then highlight your presentation, that should do
I'm looking for it.
it.
We've got a little bit of issue going on, and I thought we were all set to go. 1 second. Gina, can you help us put that back up? Because it is not coming back up.
Okay. Chelsea, if you could maybe quickly pull that up, and why don't, if you would like to start, Sheila.
I just got it, I think.
Oh, there we go. Perfect. Excellent. So now you just need to go to the, yep, there we go.
My apologies for that, and I'm really glad that I didn't start dropping F-bombs at the beginning today. Thank you, Gina, for that very kind introduction. As we begin our presentation, I want to give a little bit of context for the innovation that Winna, my delightful colleague, and I will be presenting today. Health and Human Service agencies, nonprofits, governmental, and community-focused organizations are deeply interested in shared mobility as tools that connect families, individuals, and others to opportunities, to services, supports, employment, friends and family, networks, medical care, and communities in the region that support the lives they wish to live. And so while mobility may not be the primary mandate or our exclusive mandate in Washington County Community Services, we understand its impact and we stand prepared to partner and to innovate in this space. And I wanted to provide that as we begin then to discuss a little bit of history. 2015, 2016, staff from Washington County Public Health and Environment, Public Works, Community Services and Corrections, and our county administrator began to meet regularly to discuss how the county could move forward on increasing mobility options for older adults, people with disabilities, low-income communities. That led to the successful application for funding to the Minnesota Department of Transportation for a 5310 study of transit services and transit needs in our county. The work was completed by Nelson and Nygaard and presented to the county board in February of 2018. The needs study highlights are pretty straightforward. Transportation environment is complex. The unmet need for transportation among those who cannot, do not, or opt not to drive is significant, and the awareness of existing services was challenged and challenging for individuals to identify and then to secure. The Washington County Transit Needs Study proposed 7 primary strategic priorities. These were accepted by and approved by the county board. They fall into 2 primary categories: grow existing services and to deploy new services, one of which was to sponsor subsidized taxi or ride-hailing services, which would offset the cost of a trip for a specific passenger. Also identified as key to the success in the county's moving forward on these priorities was the hiring of a county mobility coordinator. And I came on board in December of 2018. And yes, it was an interesting time to move to Minnesota. And then also to develop a standing group that represented many diverse interests and perspectives that together would look to advance these priorities. That group is the Washington County Transportation Consortium. We have a steering committee, which includes, in fact, the executive director of East Metro Strong, and includes 3 public-facing work groups: access to health, access to employment, access to the community in the region. If you will, the destination genre that each of these work groups has really spent their time focused responds to critical issues and needs that were brought up during the transit needs study. These were the destinations that individuals who were not able to connect identified as being the most challenging or the most important to confront. That transportation, those 3 public-facing work groups began meeting regularly in March of 2019. We asked them to look at those 7 priorities adopted by the county board and to identify 2 on which they really wanted to focus their efforts. Our focus being we wanted to move forward on the conversations, not simply sort of cogitate on the study and try here and there to try to figure something out, but to really zero in on those priorities they thought they could advance with the conditions that were on the ground. Those 3 groups, working independently of one another, picked 3 priorities out of the 7. And the one I want to highlight is the access to employment and access to health and wellness. Both selected the deployment of a subsidized ride-hailing pilot as a priority on which they would like to focus their efforts. I'm going to turn it over very quickly to Winna Bernard, who's going to talk about a pilot that came out of that access to employment work group. Winna was a vital part of that discussion and has led a very interesting pilot that she'll now describe. And so I'm going to turn it over to Winna Bernard.
Thanks, Sheila. All right, so yes, I was part of the Transportation Consortium, and I was working on the regional lift is what we're calling this portion of the presentation, and that was worded intentionally because it is a lift in our region to find transportation for folks with intellectual and developmental disabilities. We worked in collaboration with Anoka County and with a day training and habilitation provider called RISE and LIFT. I just want to mention that RISE, being a day training habilitation provider, supports probably about 300 adults with intellectual and developmental disabilities across both counties that work competitively, independently in their communities and rely on transportation to get to and from work. So that's who is involved in this original pilot. And why we were focusing on needing transportation or new transportation options for adults with developmental and intellectual disabilities is the current systems that were already in place weren't always meeting the needs. So a lot of the folks that we support rely on Metro Mobility, Transit Link, day program like RISE, those transportation vans. And then along with that, all of these transportation systems do unfortunately require long wait times. And unfortunately, in some areas, there's no availability during weekends or in evenings. And that's often when folks are working and need rides. And then there's just a general staff shortage. And what I mean by that is the programs like RISE that support adults working out in the community, their staffing has been very limited over the years and is becoming even more of a problem in the last probably 3 years, finding staff to support folks, and then the transportation becomes an issue. So we started with Washington County asked RISE to take a look at the folks that they're currently working with and let us know of those folks who would be interested and able to use the service. And they came up with 39 people that they thought might be interested. They did the same with Anoka County as well. And then Washington County social service staff focused on those folks that were identified by RISE that were receiving state waiver funding services. Just keep it simple, just start with a program that we know is funded and we know it's already budgeted for. So those are the folks we looked at first. Case managers like myself would talk to the individuals and the families to find if they were interested in participating in this pilot. And then in December of 2019, we started with 4 adults from each county. When the pilot ended in May, just last month, we had 25 adults from Washington County and about 15 from Anoka that were already using Lyft. So the training and setting up of the rides. So this is, I think, kind of unique about what we've done here, because I'm just going to say that because I think it is unique. I'm sure you've heard that there are other counties out there doing other projects with Lyft, and which is fantastic. I love all the innovation that's going on. But in our situation, what we did is we set it up to be sustainable. We set it up to be using current systems that families, case managers, providers, communities already using. Because it just, first of all, it just seemed to make sense. And second of all, it would be sustainable and easier for people to access. So how we did this is we set up a concierge business platform through Lyft. So they came out and trained RISE, which is that adult day training and rehabilitation program, and all their job coaches, and how to set up rides using that platform. Then in turn, RISE, their job coaches, provided training to families and individuals that were interested, and case managers if they wanted to learn how to use Lyft, how to set up the ride, and how to track, and the whole gamut. RISE then also provided, which I think was really important here, free practice rides to individuals, guardians, families at no cost. And then now, the job coaches are currently setting up rides for people. Along with setting up the rides a little differently than some of the other pilots that are going on in the metro, we also made it really easy for the billing end. Again, we're using already in place systems. Case managers don't need one more thing to do, and unfortunately, sometimes that's a barrier. So how it's paid for, how it's set up, how it's billed, how it's budgeted is exactly the same if you were using other transportation or your current transportation modes. If you're doing Transit Link, if you're doing Metro Mobility, if you're doing your family, if you're doing RISE, those payments are exactly the same. So that made it really easy for people to sign up and use on county end, and we didn't have to hire new staff to manage this program. It's already built into an existing system. I think that's what makes us a little unique in some of the other pilots. And so before the pilot ended in May, I guess, we did a survey. We did this in February, and out of the 18 folks that we surveyed, we had 12 people respond, which I think is pretty good. And this is how people were traveling before using Lyft. As you can see, we had most folks were using Metro Mobility, taxis, family members, day programs, and then Transit Link. Then we asked about their safety and the perception of safety on their current transportation before Lyft. And as you can see here, 50% felt safe always. And then 25% were neutral, 17 sometimes, and 8 never. It's kind of sad. Perceptions after using Lyft, perceptions of safety. Now this was surprising, super surprising to I think everybody involved. That perception of safety went up. And that was not what we were expecting, especially because it's such a new concept for some folks. And certainly people at a certain generation who are the guardians and parents. I was very surprised that that Lyft seemed safer for folks. And some of those could be the fact that people can now track their ride. Very important. We're working with the vulnerable folks. And so when a parent, a guardian, case manager can actually track the ride, the person themselves can track the ride, see when the driver is coming. You have a license plate, a make, you have all kinds of information, is really important and creates a level of safety or secureness about that. And then also another surprise that came out of this is that people now are riding alone with the driver, which was interesting. Not interesting, it makes sense. When you're not in a van with a bunch of people you're not sure about, you're gonna feel probably safer just being alone in your ride. So that was some of the safety stuff that came out of the survey, which was really surprising, and it just really promoted this pilot even further. Along with the survey, we asked some questions, some open-ended questions about what their favorite part of the pilot was. And I'm gonna have to scoot to my little notes here so I can read some of those comments. They're pretty impressive. Sorry about this. So we asked, what were the favorite parts about using Lyft? And of course, we got a theme coming back from everybody about being on time, reliable, and just showing up, which is really important, obviously, when you're trying to get to a job. They really appreciated the confirmation text and being able to track. And we already talked about that a little bit. Then they have a direct trip to their destination. They're not on a route having to stop and pick up a bunch of people, and they appreciated that. But one of the success stories was, and this is a quote, using Lyft has helped reduce my anxiety. I always worried that I wouldn't have a ride home at night because the taxi would not show up. Lyft shows up on time, and getting the text confirmation helps reduce my anxiety and worry. Another success story is I no longer have to rely on long and changing metro rides. I can track the Lyft driver to know when they're on their way. Lyft helps me with last minute changes in my schedule or illness. And then the last one, I think really tops it off, I think. I get more time at home instead of waiting for rides. I feel more independent. So those are some of the comments we heard from the folks that were in the pilot. Some other unexpected results other than the safety piece I already talked about is that, again, the parents, guardians were very willing to try Lyft. And again, I mentioned they prefer to ride alone. And on average, the rides actually turned out to be less expensive than their other ways they were getting to work. And those would be mainly the taxis that were costing us quite a bit of money. So that was a great, for a county, if anything costs less, that's a good thing. So that was a great result. And then back to the wait time. So we did, this is the statistic I just love. So on average, riders were saving 42 minutes a day by using Lyft and not having to wait for other transportation. And if you add that up and divide it up and you do the math for a year, that's 8 days. So we're giving people 8 days back of their life, which is just, you can't put a price tag on that. I mean, what would you do with 8 days, right? And that people are getting to work, they're getting to their jobs, and they're showing up like everyone else. That was a really big deal. And now they have 8 days to do fun stuff. So our next steps, add more riders, which we've done. So we've increased the RISE group of folks that want to use Lyft that have waiver funding. And then we even broadened to even a larger audience, which includes our county paid individuals, which I believe we're the first county to do that. Again, because it was easy and it makes sense. It's already in the budget, it's in the line. It's not, we're using existing systems to get this figured out. We're adding other day programs or DT&Hs similar to RISE in Washington County. And what's also kind of unique about this pilot is that we've asked RISE to be that mentor. So again, we're not adding another job on a county person's plate. We're using the experts who are out there in the field already setting up these RISE to teach other providers how to do that. And they're very willing and excited to help their cohorts. And then we're prepping the next generation. So our goal is to really have this up and running, towards more folks by June, which we've done. And that would, so we're able to tap into the graduates. And so kids graduating from high school and transition programs now can automatically just be introduced to Lyft and not have to, if they want, have to, figure out where they're going to work based on where their rides can go. Folks can now actually look at where they want to work because that's where they want to work. And now we can get them there. So that, I think, is the end of my piece here. Sheila, if I missed anything,
I think you've done great.
Anything, just let me know.
So now we're going to very quickly go over, we mentioned that one of the other work groups that had also selected the deployment of a subsidized ride hailing pilot was access to health and wellness. This is I'm going to give you a very quick snapshot of this pilot. But the focus of this is to support individuals and families as they build their best lives. Community Services started this pilot internal to the county in the Community Services Department. We opened a Lyft business account. Our focus was to support transportation for individuals receiving services through our adult division. These are going to be individuals with behavioral health disorders, substance use disorders, and receiving adult protection. And then in our children and family services, this is going to include supports and services to families who are involved in child protection. Some of them may be under court supervision. We wanted to respond proactively to limitations in the current services, things that didn't require advanced reservations, eligibility assessment, that allowed a person to seamlessly travel in, among, and across cities and counties. And a really important part of this was looking at an alternative to the time, the mileage, and expenses that were associated with our staff transporting individuals. When these other services didn't work, Metro Mobility or Transit Link or taxis, often staff had to provide those trips. And we wanted to see if there was a different option. One of the most important parts of this approach was the decision to use or not to use Lyft relied on the professional judgment of the social workers who knew the family, who knew the individuals. And that, I think, has been, that was an important part of the work that we did. So as we go to talk about pilot outcomes, we started with a very soft opening in October through November. We were literally trying to just piece by piece, one ride at a time, make sure that this might be a service that would work. And then in December, we spent time reassessing and reviewing how this program was set up. So we could be sure that we were protecting the confidentiality of the client. We were making sure that people were getting where they needed to go. And then in January, February, we began training that authorized staff, and then COVID hit in March. What I think is important about this adult services overview of completed trips is where people were going. About 2 and 5 trips were to employment. These were often trips when a car broke down, when a person had an opportunity to work more or work different days than those trips they already had perhaps prearranged with a coworker where they commuted together. Interestingly, very close to the same proportion were going to behavioral health treatment that was not otherwise covered through transportation by an insurance provider. Meeting with county staff, seeking support for food assistance and others. In our children's services, again, these are those families who are involved with child protection, and some are also under family court supervision. The number one reason, the number one destination were family visits. And I think that speaks powerfully to the impact that Lyft had, that this was a tool to help people connect, to make sure that those bonds between parents and children remained strong and resilient. Court was number 2, a distant second. And again, if compliance with family court, if that's critical, and making sure that people arrived on time was a key element of getting through supervision and meeting those requirements. And then finally, parenting, education, and engagement. What we saw were families using Lyft as a way to get to activities where they would learn more about the developmental milestones of their children, or learn how to bond with children with whom they may not be living, but whom they wanted to seek relationship. So as we close, what are the takeaways? We are advancing the strategic priorities of the county. Our pilots are part of a broader effort to improve mobility and therefore connections between and among those who do not, cannot, or opt not to drive. These pilots have been successful and both continue. The partnerships that we formulated and collaborated continue to grow and thrive. And perhaps most importantly, the impacts of these innovations have yielded really positive benefits in more employment, in greater independence, and access to care, and in strengthening the relationships between parents and their children, and quite frankly, have benefited the county, because a healthy county is a county that does better.
Great, thank you, Sheila and Wynn. A really great presentation, and just fascinating the really positive outcomes that you're seeing. Before I move to our final presentation, 2 just really quick clarifying questions. So first, does the pilot allow for shared rides as well as the single rides? Because it sounds like while single rides are preferred by the participants, are shared rides allowed? So that's the first question. And then the second question is, are individuals who use wheelchairs able to be accommodated through this program? So you could
Turn this to Winna. I think those are questions that Winna might answer.
Sure. So yes, a Lyft does offer shared as an option. We're currently not using that particular option in this pilot or this project, but we're just not there. But it's an option through Lyft. Oh, I didn't have my video on. And then as far as the wheelchair accessibility piece, we are looking at that option. Lyft is very aware of that need, but currently that is not available for folks in our project because right now Lyft just doesn't have the vehicles. We are looking at, we have a lot of programs, the day programs in particular that have the wheelchair vans available, and looking at somehow accessing those vehicles through Lyft drivers or encouraging those drivers to become a part of the Lyft, becoming Lyft drivers eventually. But right now, no, I'm sorry to say, we don't have that option. It'll come.
Great. So I have one more question for you that you guys can think about, and we'll come back to it after our final presentation. But there's a question around the funding sources. So for the project. So I will come back to that. All right. So our final presentation. Let me just move here. And Chelsea, can we stop the screen sharing on this particular section here while I move to to introducing Shannon?
It should be stopped at this point. I don't see it anymore.
Okay. All right. So let me start video. There we go. So Shannon Crabtree is going to be talking about car sharing access in low income communities. And they work as the community engagement coordinator at Our Car, Minnesota's only nonprofit car sharing organization. Shannon graduated from the MERP planning program at the University of Minnesota in 2017. And they continue to do part-time consulting work around transportation planning, research at the Humphrey School, often around community engagement, outreach, and survey design. Shannon also chairs the board of directors at the Women's Environmental Institute, a local nonprofit food and environmental justice organization. And I'll turn it over to Shannon.
Thank you, Gina. All right, I'm going to attempt to share my screen. There we go. Thank you for having me. Again, my name is Shannon Crabtree, and I am the Community Engagement Coordinator at Our Car. I started there about a year ago. The position is relatively new to the organization, and I was brought on specifically to tackle community engagement in relation to our electric vehicle project that we're working on, which I will touch on briefly. So this is a very large topic. I'll try to be as concise as possible. First, in order to talk about car sharing access in low wealth communities, which are disproportionately communities of color, we must first talk about transportation access more broadly. I do want to distinguish between wealth and income, just because of the historical practices of systematically excluding Black, Indigenous, and people of color from economic opportunities such as home ownership, which is where the majority of Americans hold their wealth. Many of you work in shared mobility and transportation and may already be aware of a lot of this information. As you can see from the infographic here, which was created by the Institute of Sustainable Transportation, people of color are more likely to live without access to a personal vehicle and more likely to rely on public transportation. These same communities have less access to shared mobility of all kinds, not just car sharing, but scooters and bike sharing, things like that. These communities have longer wait times and fewer route options for public transit as well. Of course, this is a direct result of systemic racism and economic exclusion over many generations. Of course, all of these things compound people's abilities to access education, jobs, childcare, food, and other resources. In this presentation, I will discuss Our Car and the history of Our Car within the Twin Cities, and how we have concluded that an increase in access to car sharing is an extremely important part of our values as an organization, and a response to addressing systemic injustice within transportation. So like I said, we'll have kind of a Twin Cities focus here. I'm going to give you a brief history on Our Car, talk about the TCEVMN project, and some research and case studies and prototyping that we did. So I pulled this, I guess, Our Car ad from our archives. So in the early stages, Our Car, it was founded as a program by Mary Moore Smarty, who's on this call right now. Hi, Mary. It was founded as a program in 2005 as part of the Neighborhood Energy Connection, which is a local nonprofit focused on environmental sustainability. You can see here that early goals in marketing were really focused on an environment, car shedding, reducing VMT, saving money, and really focused on the car-free sort of portion of people versus car-less. And for those of you who are well-versed in this sort of idea that car-free versus car-less sort of implies choice versus constraint. There was some community engagement that happened throughout the history of the organization, but it was a little bit on the lighter side compared to what we're doing now. In 2012, Our Car expanded into areas of MSP that Zipcar wouldn't go, including along Midtown Corridor in Minneapolis and then along University Avenue in St. Paul. In 2017, Our Car became its own freestanding nonprofit as NEC joined with CEE to combine their organizations. We also developed increased access hubs in 2017, which are characterized by a lower hourly rate. And most of those hubs are in ACP 50 neighborhoods. For those of you that are unfamiliar with the term ACP 50, it's areas of concentrated poverty where more than 50% of people that live in the neighborhood are people of color. Let's see. So next, I want to just talk about our current big project that we're working on, TCEVMN. It's a partnership between the City of St. Paul, City of Minneapolis, Xcel Energy, and Our Car. And it's a part of the American Cities Climate Challenge. So the Twin Cities Electric Vehicle Mobility Network, or TCEVMN is what we're calling it right now. There's two primary objectives. One of them is to increase car sharing access in ACP 50 neighborhoods through strategic community-based partnerships. And then another goal is to increase EV adoption through an increase of public charging options. So to get into a little bit of detail on this project, we have a proposal to install 70 charging hubs and 150 EV car share vehicles over about a 35 square mile area, just right in St. Paul and Minneapolis, with 3 to 4 level 2 chargers at each hub. 2 will be reserved for Our Car fleet vehicles, and then 1 to 2 will be available for public access. There's a possibility as well as for some DC fast chargers to be installed as well. This project really began in 2017. The project completion date isn't quite determined yet, but it's likely going to be in 2022. This will be going out in phases. This is the first effort that Our Car has attempted at really deep community engagement with 10 paid community partner organizations on board. And then, like I said, the full-time community engagement coordinator, which is myself. A lot of how this project started was we pulled from a lot of different sources. Here's just a few. Some of you are familiar with TERP research done at the University of Minnesota, at the Humphrey School specifically. There was specific transit research looking at spatial mismatch between where living wage jobs exist and where transit dependent people live. And like noted here, this research also extends to access of other resources like education, childcare, healthcare. There's a car sharing organization in LA called Blue LA that does this type of work as well. They're in the car sharing business, and part of our project team traveled there to meet with these folks and speak with them to better understand what they've learned, challenges, successes, etc. Fourth Mobility has been a leader on the West Coast, engaged in car sharing and community engaged research around this type of thing. Also, the Shared Use Mobility Center was a huge part of sort of how this project got started. I could kind of go down this rabbit hole, so I'm gonna leave it at that. But the best practices and recommendations kind of from all of these different sources I have listed here. So investing in an easy to use technology platform is one thing that they kind of noted that was really influential in how successful adoption of car sharing was in the wealth communities. Our Car is currently sort of in process of figuring out a more modern technology platform that we'll be adopting before our EV launch. Blending car sharing and ride hailing. So this addresses some of the access issues for folks that maybe can't actually drive a car, but still wish to use the service. Building relationships with community leaders and leveraging community partnerships. Again, like I mentioned, we have 10 community-based organizations that we are paying to help us do sort of that deeper engagement with their communities. Creating tiered pricing, we already do that, and we will continue to build in incentives and sort of different pricing tiers according to people's ability to pay, time of day they're using the vehicles, things like that. New and innovative payment technologies. We know that there are a lot of barriers to access around traditional banking, especially within low wealth communities. And so we're exploring different ways for people to access our services that way. Leveraging MOS to our advantage. So Minneapolis, of course, has already taken a lot of this on with their mobility hubs pilot projects. So incorporating transit, scooters, bike sharing, car sharing, ride hailing, sort of all into like one geographical close-knit area. And then scaling responsibly. I think Our Car has done a fairly good job of this, trying to grow organically over the years, and not get too big too quickly, realizing that that could be the detriment of the service if we try to expand too quickly. And then prototyping, wanted to touch on this again. I could spend hours just talking about this process, but in conjunction with the American Cities Climate Challenge and Silver Consulting, who is a consultant that's working with Bloomberg, we did a 6-month prototyping workshop and focus group style sort of project to understand people's perceptions of car sharing. So it was done in 3 separate tests. You can see here, it was to understand the market for EV car sharing program, and trying to understand how people thought of car sharing, whether they would find value in it. Trying to optimize EV car share program for scaled operation in ACP 50 neighborhoods. We had people complete a travel log where they sort of would compare their mode, time spent, and money spent versus what it would cost them in time and money for an EV car share, to try to understand whether people would replace trips that they took with other modes with EV car share. which many people found that they would. And then defining the ideal messaging behind how to make this program, sort of like how to make people aware of it, we'll say. Let's see. So yeah, it was a very lengthy process, and it really kind of set us up to help understand better how to ask the right questions in order to engage moving forward with our sort of deeper community engagement. Now, that's all I have on here, but for next steps, COVID, of course, has affected this quite a bit. We were intending on having our engagement done by the end of the summer. It's extended a little farther into end of September, and hopefully won't get extended any farther. Our 10 community organizations are right now sort of working on planning and budgeting around how they're going to approach it. We're actually giving our community partners sort of some base information to help them lead their discussions, but we're allowing each organization to sort of take the lead in their community on techniques that they know works well to communicate with their community members. Ultimately, we want to understand sort of what barriers to access people are facing, sort of pricing structure question with how much people are willing to and able to pay. And then we'll be asking folks about charging hub placement. And hopefully this will all lead to conversations to help us do a little more long-term planning. But I think that's going to be the biggest challenge here is how to sort of stay engaged with our community partners over time and address some of the systemic barriers to access. Some of the things we'll be able to sort of address right away with our adoption of technology and sort of reconfiguring what our service looks like, but some of these things are going to be a little bit more lengthy. And I feel that a focus on community building and reinvestment in our neighborhoods, in ACP 50 neighborhoods specifically, is really key to this. So yeah, that is pretty much it in a nutshell. I can take any questions now if anyone has any, and I will turn it back over to Gina.
Great, thank you, Shannon. There's one clarifying question. Is the ACCC and Silver Consulting report publicly available?
I don't know if it's been published anywhere yet, but we're working on like a sort of concise summary of what happened. And as soon as it becomes available, I can certainly forward it to anyone that wishes to read it.
Yeah, so that was going to be my follow-up is, can someone reach out to you individually who's on the call to get details?
Yes.
Getting access? Okay, terrific. Thank you.
Yes. And I'd be happy to talk more in detail about sort of what we did and the process and everything like that.
Okay, excellent. Great. So that the person who asked the question was Elliot McFadden from MnDOT. So he may be following up from separately with you. And then with Winna and Sheila, just to address the question about funding for your pilot for Washington County.
And do you want to answer for the LIFT pilot with the folks with RISE?
Sure. So the folks through the pilot with RISE in Anoka County, all those individuals currently have funding set aside for their transportation to get them to and from their jobs. So that was the state waiver funding service that we had talked about, and then just recently opened up to county funding. So these are folks that rely on others for transportation for all their needs. So it's already in their plans.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
And then I think just to follow up, so for the LIFT pilot with our community services folks, so those in child protection, family, maybe also family court and adult services, that comes out of it's a mix of different types of funds coming through what program the individual who's receiving that LIFT ride is involved in. We can give you more specifics on that, but it allows us, we do use some program funds and some of our local levy.
Great.
Funds that are available.
Thank you. Okay, We have time for a few questions. I'm going to turn to Meredith Klikatka because she had a question for maybe the group in general.
Yep, thanks, Gina. Just kicking it off here. Really something that's been on my mind and bugging me, frankly, something that we're thinking about in Metro Transit as well. So obviously COVID has launched shared mobility into kind of this new realm. And I think that we saw this with the CDC promoting single occupancy vehicles, going so far as to recommend employers offer incentives like paid or reimbursed parking, special requirements around transit users if they are employees going into the office. So I guess, we're thinking about this on the Metro Transit side right now. Currently, how do we begin this transition back into the office, back into a working environment? And I'm just wondering how the speakers are adapting to this reality or thinking about promoting shared mobility within their respective fields, and thinking through that transition back to the office.
Great, thanks. Any of the speakers who want to take an initial stab at that one?
Yeah, I'd love to. I think something that we're thinking about, well, first of all, we're trying to assemble some more research around transit and safety concerns, looking at the research and the data. So that's one piece that we're sticking with. We want to make sure that whatever we say to employers is based on fact. And right now there's a lot of conjecture going on around us, frankly. So one thing that we have found, it's summer, it's nice out. E-bikes, thinking about electric assist bikes as a commute solution that hits on various aspects, good positive aspects like health, wellness. It provides more of a long distance, sweat-free, single person commute option that doesn't just revert to driving alone. And we have I'm looking for it now. I'll put a link in the chat to our e-bike one-pager, but that's something that Move Minneapolis that's kind of a couple of the approaches that we're taking.
Great, thanks. Anyone else from the panel? Shannon, yes.
Yeah, I would like to kind of address that. So being that we're in car sharing, we're kind of in a weirdly unique situation because, people are using these cars largely alone. Part of our response, just to making sure that those cars are safe to use, is having our fleet sanitize the cars on a regularly scheduled basis. We've gotten a lot of great feedback from folks as far as, we have wipes in the cars for them to use. We're sanitizing them regularly. We're keeping them updated on what we're doing. And we've actually been seeing a rather sort of like a jump in user sort of usership. I don't know. Our members are using the cars, I think, at a greater rate, or they're starting to use the cars again at a greater rate than like transit, let's say, is recovering. Now, of course, we know that not everyone can drive, not everyone has a license, right? So we're trying to figure out sort of how to incorporate some of the response we've done around COVID into what our future service will look like with our electric vehicles, both as a response to how to make it more accessible for low wealth folks and people of color that have not been traditionally served by car sharing, as well as just keeping folks sort of a little bit healthier and safer in that regard, and helping them maybe make connections with car sharing that they wouldn't otherwise. As far as getting back to the office, I mean, I don't know like if we're necessarily addressing that, but yeah, I think it's very complicated, and it'd be interesting to hear what other folks have to say around that.
Great, thank you, Shannon. So one final question, and then we'll have to wrap things up. And this is for Michael around bus only lane. So this is multi-part. So first of all, as you were doing this planning work, were there objections, and how did you overcome them? Who were your allies? And finally, there's a regional transit way corridor map. So is there a similar type of map for potential roadways or corridors that would be good candidates for bus only lanes?
Thanks, Gina. Two very good questions. So to answer the first one, on Hennepin Avenue, the opposition was pretty light. And I think part of that was because we were so targeted on the locations and the durations of the bus lane. The bus lanes use what had been a parking lane. And so there was short-term impact on where people could park, but there was no impact on general purpose traffic. And at least in the northbound direction, many of those businesses aren't open at that time. So I would say, coming out of the pilot, we had overwhelmingly positive support. That's not to say that in future projects, we wouldn't see more opposition. And of course, parking is always such a concern to folks, but at least for Hennepin Avenue, we largely avoided that. So to answer your second question, that is something that I've been sort of tasked with doing for kind of a while. So it's definitely on my to-do list. Metro Transit is currently working on a project called Network Next to identify where we'd like to see service improvements. And I think the idea is that we're going to wait until we see some of the results of where we're going to be focusing our service, and then sort of catch up with that and say, okay, well, then these are the areas with a lot of service that we should be looking at bus lanes. That being said, I think we do have some ideas for the next few projects, and at least part of that is taken out of our conversations with Minneapolis and their transportation action plan.
Great, thank you. Well, we're at our time, so before we close, I just wanted to see if Mary or Meredith had any closing comments. Oops. Yeah.
Hi, I'll just be here without my face. This is Mary. Thank you to everybody for coming today. This was really interesting. I think we would like to spend a special session with each of our speakers because there's a lot going on with your work, and it's just tremendous that you took the time to join us. So thank you.
Yep, thanks all. This is Meredith. Just a reminder, I chatted the link to the Twin Cities Shared Mobility website if you want to follow us. Just as a reminder, we have a variety of subcommittee meetings that are always tackling various topics. And so with you all on the call, if you're interested in them, please reach out.
Great, and I will just add as we close, again, thank you to our panelists today, as well as our participants. And we will have another convening in the fall, topic to be determined. And it's likely that it will be virtual, but this seemed to work pretty well. So thanks to everybody for your patience as we figured out the technology, but I think it went pretty well. So thanks everyone. Have a safe rest of the day, and we will hopefully see you in the fall for our next convening. Bye, everybody.
Thanks, Gina. Bye-bye.